Hello, I'm Tim Eling from the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. The Daniel Boone National Forest is part of the United States Department of Agriculture and is over 700,000 acres in eastern Kentucky. I want to talk to you today about some innovative restoration in the Kentucky Red River Watershed. It's like it froze up.
I was able to hear it, but the video did freeze. Oh.
Okay.
So there's three types of funding that I want to focus on today that we were able to tap into and utilize along with many partners. And those are EPA 319 funding for watershed improvement, fee in lieu of funding for stream restoration, and Federal Lands Access Program, otherwise known as FLAP, funding that help us harden some parking along pull-offs along the Red River. Well, just to kind of get you oriented here a little bit, the Red River Gorge, again, part of the Daniel Boone National Forest, and it is in eastern Kentucky. It's about an hour southeast of Lexington. I think it's important to talk a little bit about the history of the Red River and the Red River Gorge. One of the most interesting parts of this, let's just go back in time a little bit. In 1960, this area was really not very well known, not many people visited, but it all changed in 1962 when Congress authorized the construction of a dam on the Red River. And people started looking around and wondering, well, what exactly would get flooded by this dam? In 1967, the Sierra Club was formed in Kentucky to fight this proposed dam. An interesting story that some of the people that started that Sierra Club chapter wanted to invite Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas to lead a protest hike along the Red River. And they decided to just send him a postcard to see what would happen. And sure enough, they sent a postcard and he came. It's quite the media event. Lots of people, both pro and against this dam. A lot of media attention. It was even the first big assignment for a brand new TV reporter out of Louisville, Diane Sawyer. I'm sure some of you know Diane Sawyer. Throughout the 70s, visitation to the Red River Gorge soared. And eventually, the governor came out against this proposed dam, but it wasn't fully put to bed good until the passage in 1993 of the Wild and Scenic River designation. So in 1993, Congress designated the Red River
Seems that the audio might have cut out just a little bit. Emma, are you still hearing the audio?
No, the audio just stopped for me as well. Let me.
I can try to share it again, or you guys can click it and move it through, whichever would work.
I'm happy.
Let me try to screen share again. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
I can see that.
Okay, hopefully this works.
This part of Kentucky is part of the Cumberland Plateau, and the Red River cuts a deeply incised gorge through the area. Much of the Daniel Boone National Forest is what I call an upside down national forest, where the private lands, towns, and farms 1993, Congress designated the Red River part of the National Wild and Scenic Rivers system, and total distance is 19.4 miles. Nine point one of that is wild through Clifty Wilderness, and about 10.3 is recreational. This part of Kentucky is part of the Cumberland Plateau, and the Red River cuts a deeply incised gorge through the area. Much of the Daniel Boone National Forest is what I call an upside-down national forest, where the private lands, towns, and farms are upstream, and the national forest portion of the Red River is actually downstream. So this is a challenge for management, which I'll get into in a moment. The Red River Gorge area contains some of the most beautiful and biologically diverse lands in Kentucky, hosting endangered species like the Virginia big-eared bat and the white-haired goldenrod. Some native species, like the white-haired goldenrod, are found nowhere else in the world. The Red River Gorge contains the largest concentration of rock shelters in eastern North America. In addition to the amazing flora and fauna that rely on these unique ecosystems, these rock shelters contain remnants of Native American and early Anglo settlers. Fragile artifacts are often found in these shelters, such as woven textile moccasins and textile bags filled with nuts and native seed crops, providing some of the earliest evidence of plant domestication in the eastern United States. The Red River Gorge area is very popular. Upwards of 750,000 people visit a year for a variety of hiking and, of course, river access activities. These are just a few of the impacts and management challenges from that heavy recreational use, whether it's trampling or waste issues, vandalism, and stuff like that. And that upside down feature that I mentioned, whereas there's private lands above the national forest lands, that contributes to some impacts to the river from things that come down, such as tires and other pollutants. And there's actually a major tributary to the Red River that has high E. coli counts. And I want to explain some of our strategies to try to combat these issues in just a moment. So let's look at the river and just give you a quick overview. The wild section, 9.1 miles, that flows through Clifty Wilderness, one of only 2 designated wilderness areas in Kentucky. The area is very dramatic, with huge boulders, towering cliffs, and challenging whitewater in some of the places. There are class 3 rapids and tight turns that make this river a fun challenge. Then as you move downstream, you enter the recreational section. That's about 10.3 miles. This is as you leave designated wilderness. It has less gradient, and it's a flatter water experience, and it's quite popular with visitors, whether they're kayaking, fishing, swimming, a variety of activities. Swimming is another very popular activity. So now that we have kind of an overview of the river, let's talk about some of the interesting funding programs that we've been able to tap into to deal with some of the management challenges. And the first funding source I want to mention are EPA 319 grants. These are named after Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. And this funding is used to fund non-point source management programs. Funding is sent to states like Kentucky, and then the Daniel Boone National Forest has been successful in receiving these funds through the Kentucky Division of Water. Then we have partners on implementation of different projects out of this watershed funding, such as Kentucky Waterways Alliance and Kentucky Pride, which is a group that works on cleaning up the area, dealing with dumps and trash and things like that. There's 4 broad goals for this Red River Gorge restoration and watershed plan, and you can see those 4 I just mentioned. So moving on to the first goal, which is the reducing erosion goal. That includes things like closing and rehabilitating visitor-created campsites that are causing erosion, such as this one, which is very close to the river, as well as trail maintenance activities to minimize erosion along heavily used trails. Then there's an education effort goal, and this includes things like information at visitor centers, school programs, and river access information, such as right here at the Coppers Creek Canoe Launch. Then there was a goal on reducing bacteria and nutrient and sediments. And this has kind of been one of the things is focusing on reducing E. coli. So through a partnership with Kentucky Waterways Alliance and Kentucky Pride, some of the funds received for that 319 grant are used to install septic systems in homes that are near the watershed, or replacing failing or leaking systems. Residents apply for this work to be done, and then the grant funding covers the cost of installation, such as what's occurring here. This is especially needed along a major tributary of the Red River, where I mentioned earlier high levels of E. coli have been documented. The community involvement goal has included various public events, but also river cleanups with a lot of people involved, such as what you see here, these big pile of tires and trash that have been cleaned up. The second funding source I wanted to talk about is called Funding in Lieu of Mitigation Program, sometimes known as FILO, F-I-L-O. When a project such as a road construction or a mining operation impacts a stream or a wetland, funds can be deposited in lieu of doing mitigation. Then those funds that are deposited can be used to restore streams and wetlands in other locations across Kentucky. In Kentucky, these funds are administered through the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. The Daniel Boone National Forest has partnered with Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources to do stream restoration in the Red River Gorge. So let's talk about what that is. In Kentucky, there's a legacy of streams being straightened for agricultural purposes, mostly in the 1800s and the early 1900s. The streams were straightened and often moved over to the side of a valley and to allow planting of crops. But then, of course, you've straightened the channel, you've increased the flow, you're causing more scour. There are definitely issues. So the stream restoration is a major reconstruction of that original stream channel to try to return water to its original flow, its original channel, which typically meanders rather than going straight. This picture shows a stream that had the meander reestablished, and it used to be straightened through here. And lots of new vegetation and trees have been planted along the banks. In lieu of funds can also help to remove old low water dams that were in this particular stream that we're looking at, which flows into the Red River. And it was an impediment to fish travel. So by removing these low water dams, we're improving the fishery as well. Then the last funding program I wanted to touch on is called the Federal Lands Access Program, sometimes known as FLAP. These funds are distributed through the Federal Highway Administration to the states. And the goal of the Federal Lands Access Program is to improve transportation facilities that provide access to, are adjacent to, or are located within federal lands, such as the Daniel Boone National Forest. So the Daniel Boone National Forest partnered with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet and some of the local counties to receive these funds to harden eroding pull-offs that were along the state highway that parallels the Red River. So what you're seeing here are some of those old pull-offs that were muddy, eroded messes being hardened through that FLAP funding. So to summarize, 3 restoration funding programs that I've talked about are the EPA 319 funding for watershed improvement, the fee in lieu of funding for the stream restoration, and then the Federal Lands Access Program that funded the hardened parking. So the hope is that all 3 of these are improving the overall Red River watershed and making it better for the American public. So that concludes the presentation, and I think we have a few moments now. We can take some questions. My email is also on the screen. If anybody has any questions later and they want to email me, feel free to do so. Thank you.
Well, sorry about the technical difficulties. We might have used up all our time, but whatever the moderator thinks.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. We have a few minutes for questions. Let me see if there's any in the chat. Not seeing any questions in the chat. But yes, Tim provided his email. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to him. Thank you, Tim, for that great presentation. Very, very interesting. I think with that, we will move on to our next presenter. And Helen, I think, had a few words before we jump into that.